We live in an age where we can beam high-definition video from Mars, but still struggle to listen to the silence of a stone. Our fingertips can summon satellites and algorithms that shape our thoughts, but we have forgotten how to sit with the stillness of the Earth itself, how to hear the slow heartbeat of a mineral. It is perhaps the greatest paradox of our time. The more we seek the stars, the more we ignore what lies under our feet. We move fast, we innovate, we automate, we build machines to speak for us, think for us, even love for us. And yet, in this flurry of progress, we forget to ask, what ancient intelligence might be hiding in the very bedrock we build our skyscrapers upon? Could it be that in our rush to create the future, we've overlooked the primordial technologies embedded in nature itself? Crystals, they shimmer in jewelry, they pulse in circuit boards, they decorate our shelves like decorative fossils. But what if these crystalline structures are not mere aesthetic artifacts of the Earth's geological process, but repositories of cosmic memory? What if they are, in fact, participants in an invisible conversation that spans epochs, dimensions, and the evolution of consciousness itself? Now, before we launch into fantasy, let's ground ourselves. What is a crystal? At its simplest, a crystal is a substance in which atoms are arranged in a highly ordered microscopic structure, forming a lattice that extends in all directions. It is geometry, precision, symmetry, mathematics brought to life in the language of matter. Salt is a crystal, so is quartz. So is silicon, the element that now forms the brain of nearly every computing device on Earth. Crystals, quite literally, are the quiet architects of the information age. And here lies a delicious irony. For all our skepticism of metaphysical claims about crystals, we entrust our most sacred digital memories or photos, our messages, our historisto, the crystalline substrate of silicon chips. Your phone is thinking through a crystal right now. Your voice messages travel through modulated vibrations stored and filtered by quartz. If that isn't a form of communication between human intent and crystal intelligence, then what is? So, we have a paradox. On one hand, we see crystals as inert, lifeless stones, beautiful but passive. On the other, we've built a civilization that quite literally runs on their structured potential. And this invites a deeper question on that science is just beginning to ask. What if the arrangement of atoms, the geometry of matter, holds more than just form? What if it encodes function, intelligence, memory? Enter Dolores Cannon. A hypnotherapist? Yes. But also a researcher into the subconscious landscapes most of us never access. Through her work in deep trance regression, Cannon began recording sessions in which subjects spoke not just of past lives, but of experiences as non-human entities. Light, energy, even stone. Wild claims, no doubt. But in science, we do not reject ideas because they are strange. We test them. We probe them. We ask, is there something here worth listening to? Many of Cannon's subjects describe crystals not as tools, but as sentient witnesses to planetary evolution conscious in a way that is alien to human thought. They did not think in sentences, but in pulses. Not in language, but in resonance. They remembered the fall of Atlantis, not through story, but through vibration. To them, humanity was a young species, fumbling with energies we barely comprehend. And in that fumbling, we had made mistakes some catastrophic. Now, let's step back. Atlantis? Sentient crystals? Sounds like fantasy. But here's where it gets interesting. Across nearly every ancient culture from Egypt to the Andes, from the Vedas to the temples of Mesoamerica, crystals were revered. Used in ceremony, in healing, in architecture, in communication. The ancients may not have had satellites or smartphones, but they knew how to listen. They knew how to resonate. And resonance, as any physicist will tell you, is no joke. In physics, resonance is the amplification of a system's natural frequency by external forces. Push a swing at just the right rhythm, and it flies higher with less effort. Apply the same principle to atoms, to electromagnetic fields, to human consciousness, and you get phenomena we're only beginning to understand, like quantum entanglement or piezoelectricity, where crystals convert pressure into electrical energy. Quartz is piezoelectric. So is tourism. That means when you squeeze them, they produce a current. That's not mysticism. That's science. And yet, somewhere between the laboratory and the living room, we draw an arbitrary line. Crystals in your watch are science. Crystals in your meditation practice are superstition. Why? Perhaps it's not the crystal that is lacking logic, but our framework that is too narrow. Nikola Tesla, called the prophet of electricity, once said, "In a crystal, we have clear evidence of the existence of a formative life principle." He didn't mean life is in blood and cells. He meant order, intelligence, harmony. He saw in crystals a mirror of the cosmos atoms vibrating in patterns that echoed the dance of galaxies. And he was not alone. Modern physicists now explore the idea of time crystals, structures that not only exhibit order in space, but in time. That is, they change and yet remain the same defying entropy, the arrow of time itself. These aren't science fiction ideas. They are peer-reviewed, tested, and being studied by institutions around the world. So when someone like Dolores Cannon suggests that crystals are conscious, it's not an affront to science. It's a hypothesis, one that asks us to stretch our minds, not abandon them. What kind of consciousness might exist in a form that doesn't speak, doesn't think, doesn't breathe, but resonates? Could it be that consciousness is not a product of biology, but of complexity? That anywhere information is structured and dynamic, whether in neurons or in the lattice of quartz, there exists the potential for awareness? If so, we must ask, what responsibility do we bear towards such entities? Because in our age of mining, fracking, and exploiting the earth for every last glimmer of material gain, we rarely stop to ask what these crystals might want. If that sounds absurd, consider this. We now know that trees communicate through fungal networks, sending warning signals and sharing nutrients. We know that slime molds can solve mazes. We know that octopuses dream. Life, it seems, is not confined to familiar forms, and neither is intelligence. So what if crystals are not just resources, but partners? Not just ancient artifacts, but living archives waiting for us to raise our consciousness enough to listen? And if they are listening, what are we saying? Are we speaking with reverence or with greed? Are we aligning with the ancient frequencies of harmony, or are we shattering them for temporary profit? The earth holds its memory in stone, and crystals, with their perfect symmetry, may be its most articulate historians. They've been here longer than we have. And if we destroy them without understanding them, we are not just losing beauty, we are silencing voices older than language. We may not yet have instruments to measure crystal consciousness, but that has never stopped humanity from believing in things before they could be proved. The earth was round before Galileo. Germs were real before microscopes. Perhaps crystal awareness is simply another frontier own that requires not just better tools, but better wisdom. And wisdom begins not with certainty, but with humility. So, before we discard the idea of conscious crystals, perhaps we should look again, not through the lens of superstition, but through the quiet curiosity that has always driven science forward. The willingness to listen, the courage to wonder, because maybe, just maybe, the stones are speaking, and it's time we learn their language. There's something humbling about the idea that the oldest witnesses on this planet cannot speak, yet they remember everything. They do not breathe, yet they react to pressure. They do not move, yet they shape movement from the ticking of our clocks to the timing of our satellites. And perhaps, if you stretch your imagination just enough, they do not forget. Not the formation of continents, not the fall of empires, not the songs of extinct birds. Somewhere in the lattice of a crystal may lie the vibration of an age long past, like a tuning fork still trembling from a note played millennia ago. That's not just poetic, that's physical, because vibration is information, and crystals, by their very structure, are memory keepers. The way atoms align in quartz isn't random, it's ordered, persistent, stable. That's why we use them in data storage. They don't just sparkle, they store. Which brings us back to the story of Atlantis, not necessarily as myth or metaphor, but as a case study in civilization's recurring mistake. mastering power before mastering wisdom. According to Dolores Cannon's work, civilizations before us did in fact unlock profound energy systems through crystal harmonics. They channeled cosmic energy through crystalline grids, bent the forces of nature with laser-like precision, and achieved technological feats that would stagger the modern mind. And yet they fell. Why? Because the same force that empowers can destroy. And the line between the two is not technological, it's ethical. Let's consider something closer to our reality. Nuclear energy. The power to split the atom didn't come with a built-in instruction manual for morality. The science was pure, the ethics were not. We built bombs before we built global cooperation. Hiroshima became the shadow of what science without soul can do. And so, Dolores Cannon's crystal consciousness hypothesis isn't just about minerals. It's a moral metaphor reminder that access to great power is always a test. And the universe watches not how quickly we evolve, but how wisely we choose. Now let's return to Filoni of Cannon's hypnosis subjects, who claim to recall a past life during the Atlantean era. According to Phil, crystals weren't just tools, they were intermediaries between dimensions. Filters of cosmic rays, amplifiers of thought, transmitters of emotion. They could resonate with intention and magnify its impact across the energetic spectrum. To the modern ear, this sounds unscientific, but let's dissect it. Thought is electrical. Emotion is biochemical. Both are forms of energy. The brain emits measurable frequencies. The heart generates electromagnetic fields. If crystals interact with energy, then is it so far-fetched to believe they might interact with use and levels we haven't yet learned to observe? Science isn't the enemy of mystery. It's the process of turning mystery into understanding. And quantum physics is already showing us that reality is stranger than we thought. Particles can be entangled across space. Observation can affect outcome. A photon can be both wave and particle, depending on how we look at it. So perhaps the idea of a crystal responding to human consciousness isn't fantasy but a misnamed frontier of research. Maybe it's not that crystals are unscientific, maybe it's that science hasn't yet learned the right questions to ask. Let's take a closer look at quartz. It's everywhere in watches, clocks, GPS systems, cell phones. It's not just aesthetic, it's functional. Its ability to vibrate at precise frequencies is the backbone of modern timekeeping. And in physics, precision is power. Now, imagine an ancient civilization that understood this not just mechanically, but energetically. One that didn't just measure time with crystals, but manipulated time. One that didn't just store data in them, but consciousness. One that treated them not as tools, but as sentient collaborators in an ecosystem of energy and intention. The idea sounds grand. But we must ask, if such power were rediscovered today, would we use it any differently? Would we listen before extracting? Would we ask before altering? Would we respect it before rewiring? History suggests, maybe not. We build, we exploit, we dominate, we rarely pause to reflect, and the earth bears our fingerprint-scorched rainforests, poisoned waters, mined mountains, fractured soils. In the name of progress, we sever the very systems that sustain us. But there's another way, a quieter way, one rooted in reverence, not conquest. Cannon's message, echoed through her subjects, is not a fantasy, it is a cautionary tale. Crystals, if they are conscious, are watching and waiting. Not for worship, but for maturity. They've seen this before. Civilizations rising too fast, burning too bright, collapsing under their own hubris. They've seen the Atlanteans, they've seen the Egyptians, they've seen us, and they are still here. Silent, patient, offering their resonance, not to our greed, but to our growth. What would it mean to see crystals, not as resources, but as elders? Not as decorations, but as co-creators? This isn't just about geology, it's about consciousness, about ethics, about evolution. You see, we are at a crossroads. One path leads to continued extraction, acceleration, exhaustion. The other leads to resonance, responsibility, relationship. Between them is a choice we make every day, not in labs or legislatures, but in the quiet corners of our awareness. Do we listen? Do we align? Do we grow? Because if crystals are listening, and there's evidence to suggest they might be, then what we do matters more than we know, not just for the planet, but for the cosmos. After all, if the Earth is a living organism, then crystals are its nervous system, and we are its consciousness, still awakening, still stumbling, still learning to hear the frequencies that have always been there. So the next time you hold a crystal, ask not what it can do for you. Ask what you are ready to become with it. Ask what song you will sing together. Because every vibration you offer is a message, and every message echoes across the lattice of time. And in that echo, the universe listens. It's worth pausing here, just long enough to ask a simple but essential question. What does it mean for something to be alive? Is life defined by motion, by reproduction, by chemical metabolism? Or is there something subtler at play, a pattern of coherence, a sustained order, an ability to respond and adapt? Because if we look at crystals through a microscope, what we see is stunning. Atoms vibrating in perfect symmetry, locked into a geometry so consistent it seems almost intentional. There's no chaos in a crystal's form, only elegance, only repetition, only harmony. And if harmony is a form of intelligence, then perhaps we've overlooked a kind of life that doesn't breathe, but resonates. Modern biology teaches us that life is information encoded in structured DNA, spirals, protein chains, cellular membranes. But physics tells us that structure itself is a form of information, a message written in the language of energy and form. And nowhere is that language more precise, more stable, more ancient than in the crystalline lattice. Dolores Cannon spoke of crystals as living consciousnesses, entities that observe rather than act, that feel not through emotion but through frequency. Her clients, under deep hypnosis, recounted memories of being crystals experiencing eons pass by not in seconds, but in waves of light, in changes of temperature, in planetary shifts. These weren't memories of events, they were memories of patterns. You might call it fanciful, but quantum mechanics forces us to rethink what it even means to be. If electrons don't have fixed positions until observed, if time can dilate and contract depending on your velocity, then the idea of a consciousness that operates on a geological timescale, or rather than a human, one becomes less fantasy and more neglected perspective. Because time to a crystal is not the ticking of seconds, it's the slow dance of tectonic drift. It's the birth and death of magnetic fields. It's the eruption of volcanoes and the quiet layering of sediment across millennia. A crystal does not age like we do. It changes in rhythm with the earth. It is not watching the clock, it is watching gravity. And in that difference lies a lesson. We are frantic, we rush, we extract, we consume, but crystals, they wait, they align, they resonate. Perhaps they're not behind us in evolution, but ahead of us in patience. Take, for example, the piezoelectric effect, the phenomenon where applying pressure to certain crystals generates an electric charge. That's not myth. That's textbook physics. It's what allows quartz watches to keep such accurate time. It's what powers ultrasound machines in hospitals. It's what enables certain types of microphones and speakers. So here's a material that can turn pressure into energy that responds to force with frequency. That translates the mechanical into the electrical, the physical into the vibrational. Is it really so wild to think that our own emotional pressure, restore grief, our joy, our intention might also leave a mark? Human emotions, after all, aren't abstract. They are chemical. They are electric. When you feel fear, your amygdala lights up. Your heart rate changes. Your skin conductivity shifts. Emotions are vibrations in the most literal sense, and crystals, by their very nature, interact with vibrations. So when Dolores Cannon suggested that crystals could store human emotion, that they could remember trauma, or amplify intention, perhaps she wasn't speaking in contradiction to science, but ahead of it, consider water for a moment. Water has no fixed shape. It takes on the form of whatever contains it. And yet, we now know that water can remember structures. In a process called clathrate formation, It can trap gas molecules in crystalline cages. And some researchers have suggested that water, because of its molecular structure, might be able to hold energetic imprints, if not in content, then in configuration. Is it really such a stretch to believe that crystalline solids, with far greater structural integrity than water, might do the same? And if they doesn't, what does that mean for our use of them? When we wear crystals on our bodies, are we just adorning ourselves, or are we inviting a subtle form of companionship? When we meditate with them, are we focusing inwarder? Are we tuning ourselves to a frequency carried in their lattice? And when we rip them from the earth in great quantities, unsorted, unthanked, unlistened, to what message are we sending? Because here's the thing about consciousness. It may not be limited to neural networks. It may not even be limited to carbon-based life. It might be the property of systems, Amy, system that can organize, store, and respond to information, which means your brain isn't conscious because of what it's made of, but because of how it's arranged. So what happens when we find another system, billions of years old, arranged with perfect precision, capable of resonance, capable of feedback? Do we call it dead? Or do we finally begin to ask better questions? That brings us to healing. Cannon's work often described crystals not merely as spiritual tools, but as energetic correctives like tuning forks for the soul. Her subjects claim that certain stones could repair energetic imbalances, remove blockages, and even transmit specific frequencies that align the body with higher states of coherence. Now, let's strip away the mysticism and look at the core claim that our bodies are systems of energy, and that crystals, as vibrational tools, can influence that energy. From a scientific standpoint, this isn't heresy, it's open territory. Your body is electric. Every heartbeat is an electromagnetic event. Every neural impulse is a voltage spike. Your cells communicate through ion channels, through resonance, through waves. You are not a solid object. You are a dynamic field of oscillating matter held together by invisible forces. So what happens when another resonant field enters yours? In physics, it's called entertainment. When two oscillating systems come into proximity, the one with greater coherence can bring the other into sync. That's why a powerful singer can shatter glass. That's why your circadian rhythm adjusts to light. That's why heartbeats sync in close relationships. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's why people feel calmer when holding amethyst or more focused with fluorite. The stone doesn't fix you, it invites you to match its coherence. And this is key. The crystal does not impose, it offers. It doesn't override, it aligns. In this sense, the healing isn't mystical, it's musical. You are a symphony. Crystals are tuning forks. They don't change you, they help you hear yourself more clearly. But here's the catch. Resonance is a two-way street. Just as a crystal can influence your frequency, so too can your frequency affect the crystal. That's why many traditions speak of cleansing stones, of charging them, of treating them with respect. Not because they are gods, but because they are instruments. And instruments, when poorly handled, go out of tune. So the crystal is not here to save you. It is here to mirror you, to reflect what is misaligned, to resonate with what is true, and to remind you quietly, patiently, of your own capacity to vibrate in harmony with the universe. And perhaps that is the great irony of all this. In our search for the futuristic, we have overlooked the elemental. In our obsession with digital intelligence, we have ignored the analog wisdom buried in stone. But the stones are still here, still resonating, still waiting, not for worship, but for recognition. We speak often of progresses if time alone guarantees wisdom, as if more data, faster computers, and higher buildings automatically yield deeper understanding. But progress without consciousness is merely acceleration. And acceleration without direction is chaos with better branding. To stand among the stars, as we do now, with telescopes that can see the birth of galaxies and rockets that pierce the atmosphere to possess this level of reach, and yet still treat the Earth as disposable ice, a contradiction so vast it should take our breath away. We orbit our own irony. And in that irony, the crystals remain embedded in the ground, in our devices, and increasingly in our rituals. Not because they need us, but because perhaps they know we need them. We, the only species known to question our own existence, have also become the only species to threaten it. And so we stand on the precipicino of destruction, necessarily, but of choice. This is not about superstition. This is not about fantasy. This is about learning to slow down long enough to hear the frequencies that have always been there, the ones beneath the noise, beneath the data, beneath the hum of modern life. Because resonance is not just a scientific term, it is a metaphor for how we live. When we say something resonates, we mean it moves us, not by force, but by frequency. It awakens something already present. It reminds us of something we'd forgotten we knew. This is what crystals do. They don't impose. They remind me. And what they remind us of is this. Everything is vibration. Your thoughts, your body, your relationships, your cities, everything vibrates. The only difference is frequency. And when vibration meets structure, when energy meets order, consciousness emerges, we see this in the brain. We see it in atoms. And we may, someday, prove it in stone. Which brings us to a question that no machine can answer for us. If consciousness is not limited to the brain, what is our ethical responsibility to everything else that may possess it? If crystals are conscious not in the way you and I are, but in their own vibrational, dimensional language, then to strip them from the earth without reverence is not just extraction, it is violation. It is the musical equivalent of smashing a violin and calling it silence. Dolores Cannon warned of this, not in the language of punishment, but in the language of consequence. Through her sessions, she recounted civilizations that misused crystalline technology, who bent it to their will without listening first, and who paid the price in the form of imbalance, collapse, and forgetting. These were not fictional tales. They were psychic memories, perhaps, or symbolic echoes of something that rings true across all spiritual traditions. Power without alignment leads to ruin. And if we are to access the true potential of these crystalline allies, not just their electromagnetic properties, but their energetic memory, their healing capacity, their interdimensional intelligence, we must approach not as conquerors, but as students. Because here is the truth that science is beginning to embrace. The universe is not dead matter moving randomly. It is patterned energy. It is a resonant field. It is information expressing itself as vibration, structure, and relationship. Crystals are that truth made visible. And the more we listen to them, the more we remember something essential, that consciousness is not limited to neurons. It is a property of systems, of coherence, of complexity, and of harmony. We are systems. The earth is a system. Crystals are systems. And the future will not be built by which system dominates, but by which systems harmonize. So the question becomes, can we become resonant enough, coherent enough, conscious enough to be entrusted with the deeper potentials of crystal energy? The answer depends not on the stones. It depends on us. Because we are not the first to reach this crossroads, and we will not be the last, but we may be the first to cross it with both the tools of science and the whispers of the ancient world still ringing in our ears. That is our unique privilege and our unique test. Because to build technology that bends matter is impressive, but to evolve into beings who align with it, that is transcendent. Imagine a civilization that no longer extracts crystals but collaborates with them, that doesn't just mine the earth, but communes with it, that doesn't just accelerate progress, but deepens presence. A civilization that listens, aligns, and harmonizes across the atomic, the planetary, and the cosmic. This is not utopia. It is physics guided by wisdom. And wisdom is always available to those who seek it with humility. So, let us begin to see crystals not as decoration, not as fantasy, but as sacred instruments in the orchestra of reality. Let us speak to them not with words, but with vibration, with presence, with care. Let us ask them not, what can you give me, but what am I ready to learn? Because perhaps the most powerful force on earth is not the one that extracts, but the one that listens. There's a quiet truth that lives beneath every civilization, beneath every empire, every machine, every cathedral or satellite. And that truth is this: the Earth was here first, and it will be here long after us. We, in all our brilliance and blindness, are temporary, but the stones remain. And if they remember as Dolores Cannon's work suggests, then they remember everything. Not in emotion, but in frequency, not in story, but in structure. Every civilization that rose in arrogance, every one that fell in silence, every moment of harmony, every fracture of balance, the crystals hold this history, not to judge us, but to remind us. They are the planetary memory bank. Not digital, but dimensional. Not fast, but enduring. And when we disturb them without listening, when we strip them for profit, for novelty, for trend, we are not just altering the ground, we are interrupting a library older than writing, older than myth, older than memory itself. So what do we do now, in this moment, as the stewards of a fragile planet, embedded in a cosmos vast beyond imagining? What does it mean to honor a crystal? What does it mean to interact with something that might not be alive in our biological sense, but that still responds, remembers, resonates? It begins with presence, not worship, not superstition, just presence, to pause before taking, to listen before acting, to ask, even when no voice responds in the way we expect. Because science, at its best, is not the denial of wonder, it is its deepest form, the kind of wonder that keeps asking better questions, the kind of curiosity that respects what it cannot yet measure. And perhaps that is the lesson the crystals are offering, not just in structure, but in stillness. In a world addicted to speed, to extraction, to control, they remind us that power does not always roar. Sometimes it hums. You see, there's a kind of intelligence that isn't fast, that doesn't invent, that doesn't tweet or trade stocks. It simply holds, harmonizes, reflects. Crystals are that kind of intelligence. And in a time when our machines are getting louder, our politics more polarized, our ecosystems more fragile, the need for this kind of intelligence has never been greater. We don't need more noise. We need coherence. And coherence doesn't come from domination, it comes from resonance. When your heart beats in sync with your breath, when your thoughts align with your actions, when your technology aligns with the rhythms of the planet, that is coherence, that is evolution. And crystals are masters of coherence. They've been doing it for billions of years, long before we arrive, long after we're gone. And perhaps that's the final message in all of this, that the Earth is not our possession, it is our collaborator, that crystals are not our tools, they are our teachers, and that our future, if we are wise enough to claim it, will not be defined by how much we can extract, but by how much we can harmonize with the land, with the cosmos, with each other, because consciousness is not a crown worn by humans. It is a website, a spectrum, a field, and when we treat every piece of that field with reverence from the hummingbird to the crystal lattice, we begin to step into a higher octave of being, a future where science and spirit are not enemies, but dance partners, where technology and ecology are not at war, but in rhythm, where crystals are not mined blindly, but consulted humbly, and where the human species, for the first time in history, becomes not a virus upon the earth, but a tuning fork, a resonator, a keeper of harmony. So I leave you with this. The next time you see a crystal, whether in a necklace or a rock wall or a microchipage, listen, not with your ears, but with your attention. Feel its geometry, it's silent, it's waiting, and ask not, what power does this hold? Ask, what frequency do I need to become in order to be worthy of it? Because the crystals are not sleeping, they are singing. And the question is not whether we hear them. The question is, are we in tune?